Beijing has slammed the new U.S. sanctions on China, calling on Washington to stop what it called the unreasonable suppression of Chinese enterprises and individuals. China's Commerce Ministry said the bans lack factual basis and due process. It added that the sanctions harm the legitimate rights and interests of the Chinese entities and nationals. Beijing has vowed to take necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of the Chinese companies and people. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on a number of companies and individuals in China over their cooperation with Iran. Qinduo Xu, Senior Fellow at Pangal Institution, joins us from Beijing. Qinduo Xu, welcome. Taking a look at the sanctions that the U.S. has leveled against China, it appears like the policy that the U.S. has, the sanctions policy, which is a failed policy when you take a look at the results that it's getting, is something that it thinks that it's going to work with China. Why do you think the U.S. is following a failed policy, especially one with China that involves sanctions?
Well, we know it's Chinese companies and individuals sad to have some businesses or relationship with their Iranian counterpart. This is a unilateral economic coercion policy by the U.S. First of all, companies from another country, they don't have any duty to follow U.S. policies. They have a duty to follow their policies, their national policies, all policies in Iran if they do business in Iran. So it's unilateral in nature, and other countries, business entities have no whatever responsibility to follow. Secondly, let's say if there are some business operations that's say against the U.S. unilateral economic coercion measures, but then again, that's really between Iran and China, as none of U.S. business. No other country, Washington is not in the position to tell which country Chinese business can do business with, or Chinese investment will be. So it's really up to the Chinese sovereignty. So in any sense, you can see this is just a violation of Chinese sovereignty, a violation of basic international rules of respecting sovereignty. So it's really, if there's something wrong, it's really Washington and Washington's coercion measure. As you said, this economic coercion, for a long time, only Iran and Iranian people have been condemned, in particular in the pandemic period of the past 3 years. So these are harsh and ruthless and inhuman, and they should have lifted all those sanctions, all those economic measures a long time ago. And well, they can continue, but as we said, as we have seen, our economic coercion measures will ultimately will not work against Iran or against any other country from Washington.
When you take a look at the two countries, obviously they do have quite a bit when it involves their trade volume. But where would the red line for China be crossed when it comes to U.S. sanctions? And I mean that in the respect where what type of retaliation may we see from China if the U.S. crosses a red line when it comes to sanctions?
Well, for China, there are increasing number of tools, I would say, in the Chinese toolbox to fight back, or let's say, countermeasures against countries like the U.S., sometimes from European countries. One example is, I think a couple of years ago, when there were economic coercion measures imposed by some European countries, basically copying the U.S. practice over the Xinjiang issue, the lie from Washington about the so-called genocide. And what the Chinese side did is basically they imposed the countermeasures against the individuals and institutions from European countries. If you impose the sanctions and coercion restrictions on the Chinese side, and China would do the same. As for the U.S., it's more like asymmetrical, I would say. You can see not long ago, there was basically a warning against the Chinese entities who are in the business of, let's say, significant infrastructure business inside China. They are warned against purchasing say, chips from the U.S. company Macron because of the behavior by Macron, which is said to have lobbied Washington against the Chinese competitor, unfair competition and or something really against the Chinese interests, where they are profiting from the Chinese market. So that's a warning shot. That's a warning message that if you are a business, you do your business. Otherwise, you could be basically, let's say, caught off guard between the two countries. And there are obviously U.S. companies and also individuals, let's say, because China is a huge market, and the market itself is a force to defend its national interests.
All right, thank you very much for that. Qinduo Xu, Senior Fellow at Pango Institution. Many thanks.